How did one delivery room moment end with divorce papers served at school pickup, in front of every parent I knew? Why did my husband stay silent for weeks, then walk away holding a paternity test order with a court date already set? I'm Ondine Sable, and in my story, I am never the problem here. I say I was protecting my freedom after marriage, and professional exhaustion wore me thin. Inside, I know I enjoy walking right on the edge of acceptable behavior. That Tuesday morning in the Riverside Medical Center cafeteria looked harmless, almost routine at first. There were weak coffee machines, fluorescent lights humming, and Darvan promising necessary distraction from monotony. He said nurse practitioners like me should never act like their lives were finished. Julian only worked upstairs because the hospital needed IT systems analysts on every floor. Even then, he rarely visited my break space, preferring his quiet server rooms. I noticed him glance over once when I laughed too loud at Devan's joke. I leaned across the small table and enjoyed Devan's eyes on my collarbone. At that moment, I decided Julian needed to see if other people wanted me, not just as Iris's mother, but as a woman who could command attention. I told myself reminding him of that was healthy, maybe even necessary for us. Darvan wrapped his hand around mine briefly, smelling like expensive cologne and surgical soap. He whispered that the real fun waited after our shifts ended, somewhere private. He claimed married women made the best company because they remembered they were alive. His words felt like permission and accusation together, and I clung to permission. Julian had already said he was fine with work friendships if I respected marriage. To me, that sounded exactly like rules, supervision, and a private permission slip. I translated his boundaries into him wanting control over every friendship I made. When he asked who Darvan was last month, I heard interrogation instead. Rhea laughed hard and said only insecure husbands panicked about harmless work flirtation. I let that become my shield, proof that Julian was the unreasonable one. Our group chat pinged then, the one cheerfully called Bad Decisions Only by Rhea. The notification showed wine glasses and a caption about living like we were young. I tilted my phone so Devan could see and Julian definitely could not. The cafeteria air felt colder around Julian's corner than around us under lights. I decided he was trying to control the whole mood by existing there. When he finally spoke, his calm, measured voice asked for one simple boundary. He wanted me not to let rotating residents get too close during shifts. In my head, I translated that into him wanting ownership of my professional life. I reacted to my translation, not his sentence, because it served my storyline. I heard myself saying he did not trust me and wanted me isolated. The people nearby heard that version, the one where I was the victim. Rhea immediately backed me, insisting work friendships were not cheating and insecure men feared fun. I watched Julian's shoulders sink just a little, barely visible under the fluorescent lights. The truth then was quieter, just him setting his empty coffee cup down. While I checked my lipstick in my front camera, his smartwatch lit up briefly. I saw a dismissed reminder that read, Hillcrest 9:30 a.m. meeting personally. I rolled my eyes because of course he had some boring secret appointment. He had been unusually calm all morning after that, less reactive to poking. Instead of finding that change unsettling, I labelled it sulking and silent manipulation. Darvan suggested we finally grab lunch later and stop wasting time on pretending. I told Julian he could join us or go back to his servers. I added that whichever choice he made would prove how much of a man. He replied there was no problem with colleagues, only with me pretending to be unmarried. I laughed loudly so everyone could register how unreasonable he supposedly sounded. As I walked toward the elevator, neon exit signs glowed red over doors. I tugged my wedding ring off my finger and slipped it into my pocket. I told myself it was practical, so it would not catch on gloves. Secretly, I enjoyed how light my bare hand looked around my stethoscope. I saw Julian notice that movement and stare at my emptied ring finger. His expression did not explode dramatically. It just went distant, almost finished, which irritated me. I wanted dramatic jealousy, not this quiet withdrawal that made me feel villainous. Devan pulled me into the elevator while Julian stayed outside, hovering near the doorway. He said he would head back upstairs and did not want another argument. I decided I would later retell that as him forbidding me from enjoying life. The elevator began moving, faint voices from dispatch crackling through the intercom above. My phone buzzed again with a message from Bad Decisions Only, encouraging behavior. I smiled at the screen as if someone had finally handed written permission. Weeks blurred into routine exhaustion until my body decided baby Theo would arrive early. Contractions started during a late shift, sharp and undeniable, and Rhea drove me fast. Julian arrived from his office upstairs, pale and nervous, holding Iris's favourite bear. I told him Iris was safe with Cleo and he should stop worrying. He nodded and said he was worried about me, not just logistics today. I softened briefly, letting him hold my hand through the first few contractions. The delivery room smelled like antiseptic and fear mixed together, and I focused. The attending doctor smiled encouragingly and said everything looked normal, just a few pushes. Julian stood beside me, whispering that I was strong, that he was proud. For a moment, I almost believed we could survive anything together, even mistakes. Then the baby arrived, and the room went completely, utterly silent around us. The pediatric nurse placed him on my chest gently, and I looked down. His skin was noticeably darker than mine, darker than Julian's, darker than genetics. The nurse exchanged a glance with the attending doctor, and the silence stretched. I felt Julian's hand slip away from mine slowly, and I looked up. His face was pale, eyes wide, mouth slightly open, and he said nothing. I heard myself laugh nervously and say something about recessive genes, unexpected ancestry. The nurse smiled politely and said the baby looked healthy, then stepped back. Julian stood by the window now, staring out at the parking garage below. His wedding ring sat in his palm, and he turned it slowly over. I demanded to know why he was acting like this, why he could not. He turned and asked quietly if there was anything I needed to tell. I accused him of racism, of cruelty, of judging our baby before holding him. He did not respond, just looked at the baby again, then at me. The attending doctor cleared her throat and said she would give us privacy. The door closed softly, and I was left holding a baby who looked nothing. In the hallway outside, I heard muted voices, and I recognized Cleo's sharp breath. Julian stepped out and spoke to her in low tones I could not hear. Through the door gap, I saw Cleo's face go pale, and she covered her. She made a quick call, then Julian joined her, and their voices became quieter. I texted Rhea immediately, framing Julian as cruel and unsupportive, saying he was abandoning. She sent back supportive emojis but did not promise to visit, which I noticed. Later that evening, a pediatric nurse returned and asked careful questions about the family. I stumbled through vague answers about distant relatives and genetic surprises that happened. Julian listened without interrupting, his face unreadable, his hands folded in his lap. The nurse nodded and said they would run standard newborn screenings, nothing worrying. She left, and Julian stood and said he needed some air, some space. I accused him of abandoning me when I needed him most, of being. He said nothing, just walked out, and the door clicked shut behind him. When the discharge paperwork finally arrived, Julian signed forms without looking at me. His phone lit up with a calendar reminder, and I saw the words. I asked what it was, and he said it was personal, nothing worrying. I called him secretive, manipulative, and he just nodded and walked ahead carrying. At home, the apartment felt different the moment we entered through the hallway. Julian set the baby carrier down gently and walked straight to the guest. I followed, demanding answers, demanding he look at me and explain his coldness. He said he needed space to process, to think, and he closed the door. I lay in our bed alone holding baby Theo and scrolled through messages. Rhea said Julian was probably just shocked that he would come around eventually. I clung to that, convincing myself he was overreacting, that everything would normalize. Outside the door, Julian stood with Cleo in the living room, and I heard. She said quietly, "I will help you with whatever you need," and thanked me. I told myself the baby's appearance was explainable, that Julian would get over. I convinced myself I could control the story if I just stayed confident. But as I passed the guest room doorway later, I saw Julian's phone. A text preview flashed briefly before he dismissed it, and I caught words. I recognized Devan's number instantly, and my stomach twisted hard, realizing everything connected. Julian's eyes flicked to me and he said nothing, only placed his phone. He walked to the guest room chair and sat, staring at the wall. I knew then that he was not just hurt, he was deciding something. The next morning, Julian moved through the kitchen like a stranger, not A. He rinsed his own mug, checked nothing, and left without asking my plans. When I complained that he had not kissed me goodbye, he looked surprised. Then he said we should not pretend things were normal when clearly not. He picked up his bag from the guest room chair and left quietly. The first few days home felt like walking through thick fog, everything muffled. Julian moved through rooms like a careful stranger, never touching me, never arguing. I told myself he was processing shock and would eventually come around naturally. Ria visited once, held baby Theo briefly, then left early, citing urgent errands. I noticed her discomfort but convinced myself she was just tired from work. Cleo refused to visit at all, saying she needed time to think clearly. When I called her, she said quietly that she loved Iris dearly forever. She did not mention me or the baby, and the silence felt deliberate. I accused her of abandoning me when I needed family support most. She replied that some situations required honesty, not just blind family loyalty always. Then she hung up before I could respond, and the dial tone hummed. I decided fresh air would help everyone see things more clearly and reasonably. I suggested a family walk along the riverside promenade, somewhere neutral and public. Julian agreed without enthusiasm, saying Iris would enjoy the playground there at least. We drove separately, which felt wrong, but I told myself it was practical. At the promenade, joggers passed us in bright athletic gear, and families clustered. I pushed the stroller proudly, trying to look serene and confident like magazines. A jogger I recognized from the hospital slowed down near us, glancing curiously. She said hello warmly, then looked into the stroller and paused noticeably longer. She remarked that the baby was unique, very beautiful, in a careful tone. I forced a laugh and thanked her, pretending not to notice her confusion. Julian walked several steps ahead, phone in hand, not engaging with anyone around. The jogger jogged away and I felt heat crawling up my neck slowly. At the playground, Iris ran toward the swings, laughing and carefree for once. I sat on a bench and scrolled my phone, checking work messages. Another parent approached me, a woman I had seen at hospital events. She admired the stroller, then looked at baby Theo, and her smile froze. She asked politely where he was from, as if adoption was assumed automatically. I stammered that he was ours, born just days ago, completely biological. She looked confused, glanced at Julian standing distant, then nodded and walked away. I felt my chest tighten, and I wanted to scream at her. Instead, I smiled harder and pretended everything was perfectly normal and fine. Julian watched from the bench across the path, silent and unreadable as stone. I wanted him to defend me, to say something reassuring and supportive. He said nothing, just checked his phone and turned slightly away from me. Later that week, Cleo invited us to a family restaurant for her birthday. The invitation came through Julian's phone, not mine, which stung more than expected. I told myself I would go and prove everything was fine publicly. We arrived at the long table reserved near the windows, the smell warm. I chose a seat near the middle, perfect for holding everyone's attention. Julian sat at the far end, deliberately close to the exit door. He greeted people politely, no drama, which somehow annoyed me even more today. I wanted him rattled so I could call him controlling and unstable. Instead, he smiled faintly at Iris and avoided my eyes completely throughout. Iris chatted about school, oblivious to the strange weight pressing down on us. Cleo arrived, hugged Iris warmly, then greeted Julian with a kiss on cheek. She nodded at me politely but did not hug me, and her. Ria came late, sitting near the end, and waved but did not sit. I felt the distance growing, a cold space opening around me visibly. When everyone had drinks, Cleo tapped her glass and thanked everyone for coming. She said family was everything, and love meant honesty, not just easy agreement. Her eyes flicked toward me briefly, and I felt the accusation hanging unspoken. I forced a smile and raised my glass, pretending her words were general. During the meal, a co-worker from the hospital stopped by our table briefly. She congratulated Cleo, then glanced at me and the stroller beside my chair. She looked at baby Theo, and I saw her eyebrows lift slightly upward. She said carefully that he was adorable, then asked if everything went smoothly. I said yes. Everything was perfect, completely normal, no complications at all, ever. She nodded slowly, then excused herself, and I felt eyes on me. Ria leaned over and whispered that people were just curious, nothing malicious intended. I snapped that curiosity felt like judgment, and she pulled back, looking hurt. I realized I was losing allies one by one, but I blamed them. I convinced myself they were all overreacting, that I was the reasonable one. Cleo brought out the birthday cake, and everyone sang while Iris clapped happily. I took a photo and posted it immediately, tagging everyone, performing family unity. Julian did not smile in the photo, just stared at the cake blankly. After dessert, Ria pulled me aside near the restroom hallway, her face serious. She said quietly that people were talking, that the baby's appearance raised. I interrupted, accusing her of betraying me, of siding with gossip and cruelty. She sighed and said she was trying to help, to warn me. I told her if she was really my friend, she would defend. She shook her head and said some things could not be defended away. Then she walked back to the table and I stood alone, shaking. When I returned, Iris was asking Julian why people whispered about the baby. He crouched down to her level, eyes soft, and said people sometimes noticed. He added that what mattered most was love, not appearances or opinions. Iris asked if the baby was really her brother, and the table. I felt my face flush hot, and I snapped that of course he. Julian looked at me then, and his expression was not angry, just sad. He said gently that Iris deserved honesty, not confusing stories that changed daily. I accused him of undermining me in front of everyone, of turning. Cleo stood and said she needed air, and she walked out without explanation. Iris looked scared, and Ria stared at her plate, refusing to engage. The table fell into uncomfortable silence, forks scraping plates, nobody speaking at all. I tried to restart the conversation, asking about Cleo's gardening, but nobody answered enthusiastically. Julian paid the bill silently, then asked for Iris's coat without consulting me. I followed them into the parking lot, demanding he stop excluding me. He said quietly that Iris needed calm, not more tension and confusion. I accused him of stealing my daughter, of poisoning her against me slowly. He replied that children watched actions more than speeches, and walked away calmly. Cleo took Iris's hand and led her toward her car without asking. I stood alone in the parking lot, watching them leave me behind. At home that evening, the apartment felt colder and emptier than before. Julian moved more of his things into the guest room, hanging shirts. I called out that changing rooms without discussion was manipulative and childish entirely. From the guest room, he answered calmly that space made everyone breathe. His voice carried no apology, just that steady finality I had started recognizing. In the living room, his laptop sat open on the coffee table. A folder tree filled the screen with names like archive Ondine files. Before I could read deeper, he walked past and clicked the window. He said he was just organizing old photos and digital clutter, sounding bored. I joked that nobody archived someone they intended to cherish, only people preparing. He neither agreed nor denied, simply asked whether I remembered Iris's medical schedule. The practical question in that moment felt like a quiet slap across. Later that night, I scrolled Ria's social media, hoping for supportive messages. Instead, I saw her story showing dinner tonight, and I was barely visible. The caption read "Family first, always," and I was cropped to the edge. I texted her, asking why she cropped me out, and she replied that she did not crop me, that was just the. I knew she was lying, and I felt the betrayal deepen and spread. I threw my phone onto the bed and stared at the ceiling. In the hallway, I heard the faint hum of a shredder again. Julian was feeding old receipts into it slowly, keeping a neat stack. Beside him stood another stack of papers untouched, clipped together, clearly spared. I asked if he was destroying evidence or planning to fake his. He replied that he was clearing duplicates and keeping what actually mattered. The phrase that mattered made me suddenly aware that I was not. I laughed it off and accused him of being addicted to supplies. He smiled slightly, the saddest smile, then turned back to the shredder. When I went to bed alone, our room felt bigger and temporary. The space where his alarm clock used to sit looked strangely naked. I lay scrolling until the screen blurred, trying to drown everything with. At some point, my phone buzzed with a text from Davin asking. I deleted it quickly, but the guilt sat heavy in my chest. Julian's phone lit up in the guest room and I heard him. He spoke in low, measured tones, and I caught only phrases like. When he finished, he walked into the hallway and saw me standing. He asked if I needed something and I demanded to know who. He said it was personal, nothing to worry about, and closed the. I stood there feeling control slipping further away, realizing I had lost. Days passed like watching ice slowly crack across a frozen lake. Inevitable. Julian moved through mornings with mechanical precision, never speaking unless it involved Iris's schedule. I told myself his silence was manipulation, that he was punishing me unfairly. Cleo called twice that week, both times asking only to speak with Julian. When I answered, she politely asked if he was available, then waited silently. I tried to engage her, asking about her health, her garden projects. She responded with yes and no answers, nothing warm, nothing like before. When Julian took the phone, he stepped into the hallway and spoke quietly. I pressed my ear against the door but caught only fragments like. Her support felt like another piece of my world breaking off and floating. I decided to surprise Julian at his office during lunch, bringing coffee. I told myself it would show everyone we were fine, perfectly normal. The IT department sat on the third floor, open-plan desks under fluorescent lights. When I stepped off the elevator, several co-workers glanced up, then quickly away. I felt their eyes on me, their silent judgment, and I forced confidence. Julian sat at his desk, back straight, fingers typing steadily on the keyboard. I approached with 2 cups, smiling brightly, calling his name cheerfully and loudly. He looked up, surprised, and his expression was not happy to see me. He said hello politely, thanked me for the coffee, but did not stand. I noticed a small yellow sticky note on his monitor that read. I asked what forms he meant, and he said just work paperwork. On his digital calendar beside the note, I saw an entry that read. I felt my stomach tighten, but I forced a laugh and joked. Julian minimized a document on his screen quickly, but I caught the word. I asked what statement he was working on, and he said nothing important. A co-worker walked past, and Julian introduced me as Iris's mom. Not. The phrase landed like a slap, and I felt my smile freeze briefly. I handed him coffee and joked about him dating his filing cabinet. He did not laugh, just thanked me again, and said he needed it. I stood there awkwardly, feeling dismissed, feeling invisible, and I realized everyone watched. Another co-worker asked how the baby was doing, her tone careful and curious. I said he was perfect, healthy, and she nodded slowly, exchanging glances. I felt the institutional judgment settling around me, cold and permanent like frost. I left quickly, pretending I had errands, and Julian did not follow me. Later that afternoon, I picked up Iris from school, standing in line. The air smelled like car exhaust and fresh-cut grass from the playground. Other parents chatted in small groups, but nobody approached me, nobody smiled. I saw a mother I recognized from hospital events and she turned away. Iris ran toward me, backpack bouncing, and she asked if Daddy was coming. I said no, just me today, and she looked disappointed, which stung. As we walked toward the car, another parent called out my name. She asked how the baby was, then added that she had heard. I forced a smile and said everything was fine, absolutely normal and healthy. She nodded but did not look convinced, and she walked away quickly. In the car, Iris asked why people kept asking about baby Theo. I said people were just curious, that babies made everyone interested and nosy. She asked if the baby looked different because of genetics, using a word. I realized she had been listening to adult conversations, absorbing every whispered comment. I told her genetics were complicated, that families came in all different shades. She asked if Daddy was sad because of genetics, and I felt. I snapped that Daddy was fine, just busy with work and stress. Iris went quiet, staring out the window, and I regretted my tone. I tried to apologize, but she did not respond, just clutched her backpack. That evening, Julian came home later than usual, carrying a slim leather folder. He set it on the hallway desk without explanation, then went straight. I asked where he had been, and he said he had a. I demanded to know what meeting, and he said it was personal business. I accused him of hiding things, of planning something behind my back secretly. He replied that he was handling responsibilities, nothing more, nothing less at all. His voice was calm, measured, like reading a script, and it terrified me. I followed him into the guest room, and he closed the door gently. Through the door, I heard him make a call, speaking in low tones. I caught phrases like timeline confirmed and documentation complete before he noticed me listening. I spent the evening scrolling my phone, looking for reassurance in comments. Ria had not posted anything in days, and her silence felt deliberate. I texted her asking if she was okay, if we were okay. She replied hours later saying she needed space, that everything felt too. I asked what she meant, and she did not respond at all. I felt the walls closing in, friendships dissolving, and I blamed Julian entirely. I convinced myself he had poisoned everyone against me with his calm. The next morning I took Iris to the playground near her school. I needed to perform good motherhood, to prove I was still engaged. Iris played on the swings while I sat on a bench scrolling. Another mother approached, someone I had seen at school events before regularly. She sat beside me and said she had seen videos online recently. She said her husband followed someone who reposted them, and everyone was talking. I felt my face flush hot, and I asked what people. She said they were saying the baby did not look like Julian. She added that her husband wondered if I knew who the father was. I stood up abruptly, calling her nosy and judgmental, and she backed. Iris stopped swinging and stared at us, her face scared and confused. I grabbed Iris's hand and pulled her toward the car, ignoring protests. In the car, Iris asked why I yelled at the nice lady. I said the lady was not nice, that she was mean. Iris said quietly that people whispered about us at school too now. That night, Julian sat in the living room organizing another binder labelled. I walked past and saw copies of text messages, printed and highlighted. I saw photos of baby Theo, close-ups showing his skin tone clearly. I demanded to know why he was collecting evidence like a detective. He said he was protecting himself, making sure everything was documented and clear. I accused him of planning to use it against me, too. He interrupted calmly and said he was not using anything against anyone. He added that he was simply preparing for whatever came next, responsibly. His calmness felt like a weapon, sharper than any shout could ever. The following evening, Cleo invited Julian and Iris to her house again. When I found out, I called and demanded to know why. She said Julian asked her to help with Iris to provide. I said I was Iris's mother, that I should be included always. She replied gently that sometimes children needed calm, and she hoped I understood. She said she was not choosing sides, only choosing what was best. I accused her of abandoning me, of judging me without knowing everything. She said quietly that she knew enough, and she hung up softly. I stood holding the phone, feeling the last family connections slip away. Later that week, Dr. Holt called me into her office unexpectedly. She said there had been concerns raised about my professional conduct recently. I asked what concerns, and she mentioned distracted behavior, personal drama affecting. I accused her of listening to gossip, of taking Julian's side unfairly. She said this was not about sides, only about maintaining workplace standards. She added that several staff members had mentioned my visible stress and distraction. She suggested I consider taking leave to handle personal matters privately and I refused, saying I was fine, that everyone was overreacting dramatically unnecessarily. She said the option remained open and she hoped I would consider. I left her office shaking, feeling institutional walls closing in around me. That evening, I confronted Julian in the guest room, demanding to know. He said he had not spoken to anyone at the hospital. I accused him of lying, of orchestrating everything to isolate me completely. He replied that people noticed things on their own, that actions had. I screamed that he was turning everyone against me with his victim. He stood calmly and said he was not playing any act. He added that he was simply living through consequences same as me now. His words felt like a final door closing, and I realized I asked if he was planning to leave, to file for something. He said he was handling things properly, through appropriate channels, and I would. I felt panic rising, cold and sharp, and I demanded he tell. He said when the time came, I would know, and he walked. I stood alone in the guest room doorway staring at organized binders. On the desk, a USB stick sat labeled with last week's date. Beside it, a printed document showed only the word statement at top. I reached for it, but Julian returned and calmly moved it aside. He said some things were private until they needed to be public. The next morning, Julian moved through the kitchen like a stranger passing. He rinsed his mug, checked Iris's lunch, and left without a word. I followed him into the hallway, demanding he stop ignoring me entirely. He turned and said he was not ignoring me, only managing. I asked what he was managing, and he said his piece. He added that he would not argue anymore, would not engage. I accused him of abandoning our marriage, of giving up without trying. He replied that trying required two people and he was clearly alone. He picked up his bag and I noticed his wedding ring was. I asked where his ring was and he said somewhere safe. He walked out and I stood alone, feeling everything collapsing inward finally. That afternoon, Iris asked if Daddy was coming back to our bedroom. I said Daddy needed space right now, that grown-ups sometimes needed distance. She asked if we were getting divorced like her friends' parents did. I snapped that nobody said divorce, that she should stop listening to it. She started crying, and I immediately regretted my tone, reaching for her. She pulled away and said she wanted to call Grandma Cleo instead. I let her, and I heard her small voice asking if. Cleo's response was gentle, reassuring, and I felt Iris relax slightly hearing. When she hung up, Iris said Grandma said everything would be okay. I asked what else Grandma said, and Iris replied some things. I felt a cold wave of realization that everyone was preparing for. I was the only one still pretending, still hoping, still denying reality. I woke Monday morning feeling the apartment shrink around me, walls closing slowly. Julian moved through the kitchen like a polite stranger, pouring coffee without speaking. I told myself his silence was temporary, that he would eventually crack emotionally. Cleo called again, asking only for Julian, and I handed the phone over. He stepped into the hallway and spoke in low, measured tones. I was strained. I heard phrases like timeline and documentation, but nothing concrete or actionable clearly. When he returned, he said Cleo wanted to take Iris for the weekend. I demanded to know why she never asked me first any more directly. He replied that Cleo thought Iris needed calm, and he agreed with her. I accused him of orchestrating everything, of turning my family against me systematically. He said he was not orchestrating anything, only protecting Iris from unnecessary tension. I asked what tension he meant, and he gestured vaguely at the space. He said the atmosphere at home was not healthy for 6 years. I snapped that the atmosphere was his fault for being cold and distant. He replied that he was calm, not cold, and there was a difference. I told him calm was just another word for manipulative emotional withdrawal strategy. He did not respond, just rinsed his mug and placed it carefully apart. The two mugs sat on opposite counters again, a silent territorial map drawn. That afternoon I took Iris to the playground, desperate to prove normalcy. She played on the swings while I scrolled my phone, checking messages. Another mother approached and asked if everything was okay at home lately. I forced a smile and said everything was fine, absolutely perfect, and normal. She nodded slowly but did not look convinced, and she walked away quickly. Iris ran over and asked why people kept asking if we were okay. I said people were nosy, that they liked drama and gossip too much. She asked if Daddy was coming back to our bedroom, and I froze. I said Daddy needed space right now, that grown-ups sometimes needed distance. She asked if we were getting divorced like her friend's parents recently did. I snapped that nobody said divorce, that she should stop listening to rumors. She started crying, and I immediately regretted my tone, reaching for her gently. She pulled away and said she wanted to call Grandma Cleo instead now. Later that evening, Julian sat in the guest room organising another binder. I walked past and saw copies of text messages, printed and highlighted carefully. I saw photos of baby Theo, close-ups showing his skin tone clearly. I demanded to know why he was collecting evidence like a detective. He said he was protecting himself, making sure everything was documented and clear. I accused him of planning to use it against me in court. He said he was not planning anything aggressive, only preparing for whatever came. His calmness felt like a weapon sharper than any shout could ever deliver. I asked if he was planning to leave, to file for something. He said he was handling things properly, through appropriate channels. And I would. I felt panic rising, cold and sharp, and I demanded he tell. He said when the time came, I would know, and he walked. The next morning, Julian's phone alarm chimed with a reminder labelled paper. I asked what it meant, and he said it was personal business. I accused him of hiding things, of planning something behind my back secretly. He replied that he was handling responsibilities, nothing more, nothing less at all. His voice was calm, measured, like reading a script, and it terrified me. That afternoon, Dr. Holt called me into her office again unexpectedly and seriously. She said the hospital was placing me on mandatory leave, effective immediately today. I asked why, and she mentioned professional conduct concerns and workplace distraction issues. I accused her of conspiracy, of taking Julian's side without evidence or... She said this was not about sides, only about maintaining standards and reputation. She added that I could return when personal matters were resolved completely. I left her office shaking, feeling institutional walls closing in around me. That Thursday, I drove to Iris's school for pickup, telling myself everything. The parking lot smelled like car exhaust and fresh grass from nearby. Other parents stood in small groups chatting while I parked and checked. A man in a plain jacket approached me, holding a thick envelope. He asked if I was on Dine Sable, and I said yes, confused. He handed me the envelope and said I was being served officially. I opened it and saw summons and petition for dissolution of marriage. Beneath it, motion for court-ordered paternity testing with a lab appointment. Beneath that, temporary custody and parenting time orders, listing specific days carefully. A hearing date was circled in red, 6 weeks from today. I looked up and saw Julian across the lot standing calm. Cleo took Iris's hand and walked her toward the car gently. Parents nearby whispered, and I stood alone, papers trembling in my hands.